we continue in Gangtok, Sikkim. One day later we may be, but we are still back in what year? You've just arrived in
1957, I guess.
And you're arriving at Columbia University.
At Columbia University.
The first time in New York as well?
Yeah, I've been in New York prior to before that. First days or first weeks in New York at the Columbia University were very difficult. I felt lost in this new academic environment. I was totally ignorant of pressures of learning graduate school in America. I thought that studies were organized a little bit like in Geneva. That means in a very leisurely manner. One was not obliged in Geneva to attend courses. And one read just a couple of days before the exams. I soon felt the extremely competitive atmosphere in Columbia. And in a sense, I liked it. Because of this competitive atmosphere at Columbia, that I think that I made it, I succeeded in passing the exams. Competition was so stiff that I thought that I was back in the bazaar of Istanbul, and there was a Greek instructor there who taught me a few things, and he told me what to read, what to not to read, how fast to read. He gave me some coaching about how to adapt to the new atmosphere, and that was it. I started studying under pressure, and I was terrified by what I was told, that we were 40 graduate students admitted, and we were told that in a few years only 4 will graduate. I was terrified by that, but I made it. I made it.
Who were the other 3?
I don't know. I don't know.
None of them went on to become professional anthropologists that you remember?
Helen Safa, I think, became a professional anthropologist. Sidel Silverman, who until last year she was head of the Wenner-Gren Foundation, she became.
What was the intellectual climate like at Columbia? Who were the teachers? Who was calling the shots in terms of books, articles?
Initially I was very impressed by the secretariat, the department secretary, the office of the secretary, because all the pictures of the old professors were hanging on the wall of the secretariat. And first was Franz Boas's picture. It was slightly larger, very slightly larger than the others. And then you had everybody else, Ruth Benedict, Julian Stewart, Margaret Mead, Kroeber, Lowy, Paul Radin, and several others. All of them same size, with the exception of Papa Franz. And also the faculty sort of tried to, very gently, very discreetly, to give you the feeling that that is where anthropology was made in the States. Not Harvard, definitely not Harvard. I mean, in the reading lists, in the bibliographies, very rarely could one find a Harvard book. You see, it was. It is as if Harvard didn't exist, you know. One thought about the time when Boas established anthropology in America and allocated Mesoamerican archaeology to Harvard, and that was it. They were not supposed to do anything else. So that was still a little bit the atmosphere that prevailed at Columbia, although it was the end of that, of the Boasian period, of course. But there were still people like Margaret Mead and others who were trained under Boas, and who really devoted a cult to Boas. What else there?
Who was head of department when you arrived?
I don't know. The department was not properly organized because there were these young Turks who were very young. Marvin Harris, Morton Fried, were the young Turks at the time. You see.
You weren't a young Turk then?
No, I was a student trying to pass my exams and nothing else. Now, everything that I learned, that I read was new to me. Every lecture concerned a new course, a new subject matter that I was not aware of. So all that I knew previously was ethnographic descriptions. I was unaware of theory, of anthropological theory. One reason was that theory there was in Geneva, theory was in sociology. You see, there was no such thing as anthropological theory. Durkheim was a sociologist, Marcel Mauss was a sociologist. So, from the old school, William Duncan Strong, who became my thesis director, together with Margaret Mead. William Duncan Strong was an archaeologist. He had established plains archaeology. The basic discoveries in reference to plains archaeology, and then South American stratigraphy, Viru Valley stratigraphy he established. But he started, William Duncan Strong started as an ethnographer in northern Labrador among the Mistassini Indians. And that is probably the reason I was already interested in Eskimo. That is why I think that he accepted to be my tutor, my thesis supervisor. Margaret Mead, I took the course of, not the course, the seminar of Margaret Field Methods and Techniques, and which turned out to be essentially a seminar concerned the use of audiovisual recording devices. Margaret Mead was fanatically interested in the new technologies, film and audio recording methods. So her seminar on field methods was extremely interesting, and recently I published an article about this seminar in Russia.
Was she a good teacher?
No, you see, she had an audience. These were mostly young women, female students, who were occupying the first 2 or 3 rows of her classroom, and who were looking at her with extreme admiration and were sort of worshipping her. And Margaret Mead didn't teach much. Let's say out of 30 hours, she probably taught half of that. The other half, there was somebody to replace her. And usually somebody concerned with psychoanalysis, who came out of a psychoanalytic school. That was a feeling that I got.
Was Margaret Mead at this time already a figure in American popular culture?
Oh, very much so.
By this time already?
By this time already, by the early 50s, definitely so. Late 50s, definitely so.
So she had already become a household name on the television, on the radio?
She was a household name on television and radio. She did, because of that, people at Columbia, teachers at Columbia sort of didn't like her much because of the extraordinary, she became a public figure, a public intellectual, and the professors at Columbia objected to that. You see, they were not accustomed to having, a professor who's a famous public figure.
aside from the competitive element and the survival of the fittest mentality, 20 down to 4, was it an intellectually
40 to 4.
Was it an intellectually stimulating place to be?
Very much so. Very much so. And what I used to hear that most of the students, brighter students who completed the degree, the PhD, they wanted to remain at Columbia, teach, work, do research there. It was very painful for them, very difficult to separate from alma mater. Really, alma mater was in the full sense mater. So that was constantly repeated. One should not forget that Columbia is the only large, prestigious university in the New York area, New York City, which is the largest city in the world, and 10, 12 million people, 14 million people live there. There are many other institutions of higher learning in New York, but only one prestigious, and that's Columbia. So for a New York student, you have to make it to Columbia, or that's it. You had it. And that is that's the root of the competitive spirit that one could feel at Columbia in the Department of Anthropology.
You mentioned that Harvard was very much not on the books, on the book list.
Yeah.
What were the theoretical influences? Was Europe or Britain present?
No. At the time, that's a difficult question to answer. 1957. Now I forgot the name of the fellow who came from the University of North Carolina to teach kinship. He was just spending a year at Columbia, and he taught the course of kinship, and that was 57. He had practically not heard about Lévi-Strauss. Lévi-Strauss had published a major article in English on kinship in the collected book Anthropology Today. And he was not aware of sort of French literature and kinship in any way. He was aware of the British literature. Yes. No, see, the feeling, of course, we had to read Radcliffe Brown's classic essays, Malinowski, but the message was that anthropology was made here at Columbia, in America at Columbia. That was the message. But we did have to read the classic British contributions.
And then be critical of them, perhaps? Engage
And
with
then
them.
be critical of them, structural functionalism, etc.
So you completed your 2 or 3 years of coursework?
I completed a couple of years of coursework, then a third year of readings, and that is the time when I started research work up north in the Arctic.
How did that happen?
As I mentioned, when I arrived in the National Museum in Ottawa, that was 1954. Same day I arrived also a young French ethnographer by the name of Claude de Goff, who had just graduated from the Institute of Eskimo Studies at Copenhagen. So he was a trained Eskimologist, and Leroy Gourand in Paris had suggested to him to work on the Belcher Island Eskimos, really at the center of Hudson Bay, who have been isolated for a long time from the east coast of Hudson Bay, the Eskimos, the Tivimut. And he spent a summer there, and he did very good work. And but during the second summer, he drowned. He was trying to kayak and he drowned. So we shared an office also in the museum. The director of the museum asked me to continue Claude Degoff's work, in a sense. He said that Eskimo studies, Eskimo research was very important for the museum and for Canada generally, and it was important that the young men sort of continue his work. So I started I had to become an Eskimologist, despite the fact that I've never done any reading, and I never fantasized about doing field work in the Arctic. My interest was in the desert areas of Africa or Southwest Asia, the Bedouin, or the various Saharan tribes. That's what I was interested in. So already as a student at Columbia during the summers, I had, as an employee of the National Museum of Canada, I had the opportunity to go in the north and study the Eskimos. So during my third field trip up north, when I was still a student at Columbia, I immediately sensed that I belonged in another category in comparison with the other students. The other students during summers, they had to work in order to make some money and to continue to pay for their studies. While I was going to do field work, I was doing field work in a classic ethnographic area, the high Arctic.
You had scholarships for this, or?
No, that's the National Museum money. I was an employee of the National Museum.
At the same time as being a graduate student?
I was given leave of absence by the National Museum to go and study, and the National Museum paid for my tuition at Columbia.
And also
for field work. So that was...
in the understanding that you would return to Ottawa?
I will return to Ottawa and I will become the Eskimologist. That was the understanding.
So, can you give me a sense of your first field trip to the Eskimo land?
My first field trip.
You were 30 years old? Something?
27. My first field trip. I was extremely insecure about the Arctic because I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't read anything on the North, and I didn't know where to start. I knew that profound changes had taken place in the Arctic, mainly due to the presence of the Hudson's Bay Company. I had some knowledge about the classic works, let's say Franz Boas's work on Cumberland Sound, Diamond Genesis among the Copper Eskimos, and essentially the results of the Fifth Thule expedition with Knut Rasmussen. I had some knowledge of the classic works. I knew that this classic culture had disappeared, Eskimo classic culture, thanks to the activities of the Hudson's Bay Company and the missionaries. Wherever a Hudson's Bay Company post, HBC post, trading post was established, a missionary arrived and settled near it. So changes were drastic. On the other side, understood that this new acculturative period, where the HBC was the prime actor, was not properly described and analyzed. The classic ethnographic contributions refer to the traditional period of the Eskimos, traditional life. I thought that it would be good to start researching the fur trading periods as organized by the Hudson's Bay Company, which was a fur trading company, since there was no real analysis of fur trading and sociological analysis of fur trading. So there was only one American scholar, John Honigman, who had done recently work in the Canadian North. and who did not belong to the classic scholars. Honigman had done extremely interesting psychologically oriented work in the western subarctic among the Casca Indians in northern British Columbia. And after that he moved east to a place called Great Well River on the east coast of Hudson Bay, where lived both Eskimos and Indians. And the Great Well River is located on the tree limit. You see the border of the tree line. On the tree line it is located. And he had done studies there on the interactions between the three ethnic groups, the Anglo-Canadians, Eskimos and Indians. And also on child-rearing patterns, on ethos, and a little bit on subsistence, general ethnography. So I thought that was 1950. So I thought that I should go there 7-8 years later and restudy this community in order to base myself to benefit from the work of John Honigman that was already done. And I went there. It didn't work out because same year that just a year before I arrived there, the Canadian Air Force had decided to build a large Air Force base with radars, etc. It was the Cold War, 1956, 57, and everybody expected Russian planes flying over the Arctic and bombarding New York and Chicago. So when I arrived there, I found a situation of intense culture contact. But I described it properly. I described the situation of intense cultural contact very well. And it turned out that that was the first study of intense cultural contact published for northern Canada. And it was widely quoted in professional journals. So that was my first field trip. I had to study something that I didn't want to study. As a matter of fact, at Great Well River, trapping had been abandoned already. But I didn't lose sight of my research aim, the sociology of trapping. And for the following summer, I went to Pavangituk, further north on the east coast of Hudson Bay. And same situation. There, a very talented American artist by the name of John Huston had been there the previous summer, and he had taught the Eskimos how to carve little figurines. And all of them, there was a market, good market for these little soapstone figurines. All of them had started carving these and had become sculptors. So by the time I arrived, I discovered that had become a community of sculptors. And there again, trapping had been abandoned just the previous year. Anyhow, I was able to draw on the topographic map the trap lines of the Inuit, and I was able really to reconstruct for the couple of previous winters, the ecology and the sociology of trapping. For my third summer, I thought that really I should be more systematic and try to discover the most traditional of Eskimo communities, and I really interviewed missionaries, policemen, traders, etc., and discovered that Pelly Bay, high in the central Arctic, was a community where no Hudson Bay Company post had ever existed. The reason was that the bay is locked by ice all year round, and no boat can enter the fjord. And there is a Catholic missionary there, who certainly must have converted the Eskimos, but they still hunted, trapped, and remembered traditions. So I went there. It turned out that this community was so traditional, thanks to the father, to the missionary, that trapping was not very important in the annual migration cycle. The Pavongnituk Eskimos had up to 100 traps each. The Pelly Bay Eskimos had 3, 4, maybe 5. Trapping was a side activity to seal hunting. So again, there could not. I missed the classic form of trapping, but I found other things, of course. So after I completed my studies, I decided to go back there to Pelly Bay, and after I completed my residence at Harvard and passed my comprehensive examination, I returned there and spent a winter at Pelly Bay, and that was a serious ethnographic experience. There were no houses, there were only igloos for the Eskimos. A few Eskimos lived near the church. The church was a small stone hut where the missionary lived, and nobody else. And it was also, anyhow, a trading post. He traded also, had become a trader, and he traded in ammunition, tea, sugar at Christmas time and Easter he sold, and axes and knives he sold, tobacco, and that was about it.
A few questions. We've fast forwarded, but I have some personal questions for you. By this time you were married.
Yes.
Did your wife accompany you?
No.
May I ask why?
My wife was not particularly interested in ethnographic fieldwork. Then we had a child already, not my son, Nicholas, and she had to look after our son. And also I went to places where it was not easy for a wife to come, you know. I myself, Pelly Bay, barely survived. I mean, I had to eat native food all the time, and had to adapt to extreme cold. My wife simply wouldn't have been able to make it. You see, the Arctic is very different from working here in Sikkim or Nepal. Had I worked in Nepal, certainly my wife would have come here, but there, no. They're very difficult to survive, I say.
Can you give me some sense of the conditions of field work? How did you get there? How did you learn the language? What did you eat?
How did I get there? There was an American dew line base about 50 kilometers south, and I could fly to that base.
In a military aircraft?
Military aircraft. Well, it was a commercial aircraft, but hired by the military. Supply aircraft, and the Eskimos, an Eskimo sled would wait for me, because the missionary had radio sled, and from the south I could radio to him to send a sled and to wait for me at the airport.
It strikes me, if I may interrupt my own question, that that the missionary and the ethnographer, although they're in radio contact, may have quite different aims in the same area.
Yes.
Did you have good relations with this missionary?
Yes and no. Initially, our relations were very good, and he did help me in my work. My feeling was that he was a little bit bushed. That is a Canadian expression from the Arctic. A trapper can be bushed. After a trapper will spend alone a winter along his trap, running after his trap line, he can become bushed. That means that he's becoming obsessed by little things. For instance, if he's making tea, his teapot has to be put that way and not the other way, you know. And little things like that become extremely important. He also becomes suspicious of everybody. And he doesn't like change. He doesn't like other people visiting him. He feels threatened. Some paranoid characteristics. So my feeling is that the missionary who had been there 15 years alone and must have been bushed. Now in the middle of the winter, when there is no light, etc., when I was there, maybe also I had become bushed myself. And so at the end of our stay, we sort of, I won't say that we became enemies, certainly not, but we were suspicious of each other. This end of my stay was extremely tragic and dramatic, extremely so. The Pelly Bay Eskimos, the Netzelik Eskimos, numbered about 100. One day on the radio we received a message that plane will come with a medical doctor who would take X-ray pictures of the Eskimos. Now the doctor arrived in a plane. He landed on skis, and my igloo was the cleanest, and he put his instrument, the X-ray machine, in my igloo to photograph, you see. So I helped him together. We photographed the Eskimos, and he left. A few days later, everybody was sick, including the missionary.
The missionary had also been photographed?
I don't remember, I cannot tell you. But he was sick also. Everybody was in bed. I was the only one who had immunity, you see, against this sickness. And I went to the missionary, who was lying down, but he was conscious, and asked him, shall I start a generator in order to send a message on the radio to ask for help? He said, no, we had that in the past also, and the sickness cleared, you know, we survived in the past. And true it did. After 4 or 5 days, a week let's say, the Eskimos started getting up and walking around, and the crisis was finished. Few days later, again, everybody in bed, back to bed. Result, 15 people died. I buried them. And, 14 people died. And that is 14% of the community wiped out, you know. So, anyhow, so that was the...
Were you blamed in some way?
Yes.
For having housed this doctor?
Yes, no. I was never officially blamed, but the feeling that I got is that through my questioning about shamanism, I had provoked the anger of a recently deceased, well, yes, relatively recently deceased man whose soul struck, you see.
Oh, so it had nothing to do with the doctor and your immunity to his...
No. That is the native explanation. The Eskimo explanation was, you see. Now, it is possible also that the missionary who was very close to the Eskimos was suspicious of my work on shamanism. And I suspected later on that probably he feared that I would try to establish in the community a kind of a shamanistic republic, you see, and oppose his real domination, not only spiritual but also social, political domination. That I will revive the shamanistic practice who had disappeared very recently, and wake up the souls of the dead shaman. And so that was the context in which the missionary and myself separated.
The language, did you learn some?
Some I learned, not much, but I learned to, not for shamanism. I could not conduct a study on shamanism. I was able to conduct a study about everyday activities, hunting, fishing, trapping. My orientation was almost a study, in my research orientation was almost exclusively in reference to Julian Stewart's ecological theory. And I was searching for the adaptive strategies of the Inuit. And shamanistic studies, they came on the side. I did not expect them.
Did the missionary speak the language?
Oh, as a native, yes.
Did you have an assistant?
I had an interpreter, an assistant, a guide.
Through which language did he interpret?
English. Not from this community. From neighboring community, another Netsilik. There are two Netsilik, three Netsilik communities. From a neighboring where there was a Hudson Bay store, where English was prevalent. So that was the context.
The food, the living environment. You mentioned an igloo.
Only igloo and native food.
Seal meat.
Seal meat. I had sugar and tobacco, and I welcomed guests and generously offered tea and tobacco, plenty. My tobacco pouch was open for pipe smokers. I smoked pipe, and that attracted audience. So.
But your assistant lived with you in the igloo?
Yes. Together we spent several months.
Was it difficult to explain when you first arrived what you were doing there and why you were there?
When I arrived at Pelly Bay the first time, I had done previous research work among the Eskimos of East Hudson Bay, and I had a name. My name was Sivudli Vignac, the man who is interested in who works on the old things, who loves old things. So I introduced myself like that, and that is, the people understood that I was interested in the old things, which was a perfectly legitimate activity. And that is how we started, that's the way we ended also research, during the filming also.
During these first initial summers in
Yes.
in the Inuit lands, did you make use of audiovisual technology? Did you photograph?
Of course, I photographed a lot. I organized an exhibit of my first photographs at Great Well River just a couple of months ago, at Great Well River today. And the Eskimos were fascinated. I did not expect such a enthusiasm. Definitely not. So I did photography. I considerable tape recordings. At Pelly Bay, I recorded something like 50. I used something like 50 tapes, Nagra.
Reel to reel.
Yes. Musicologist from Queen's University in Canada. I presume that was her dissertation. She published by the night in 2 volumes. My collection was published. I did not study it. Beverly Coven. Anyhow, she studied it. Now the shamanistic songs, the shamanistic texts, are being studied by Professor Austin from the University of Leiden.
Jarig Oosten.
Yes.
I know him well.
Yeah, and by Professor Logrand at Laval University. Together I gave them permission to use the shamanistic texts that I had collected at the time. I did not study them because I produced my analysis of shamanism directly from my field notes as a side activity. You see, I thought at the time, students when interested in a theory, they're fanatically interested in a theory, and they believe that the theory would explain everything. I was firmly convinced, fanatically convinced, that Julian Stewart's theory would explain everything. So I unwillingly collected data on shamanism, and this data tried to fit it in the ecological theory, and or data and suicide, etc. And so I had to write down take some notes on shamanism because the informants sort of started. I will never forget the context. I don't know why. I asked an old informant by the name of Anernelik, who is the one surviving son of a famous shaman. Anyhow, Anernelik, we were talking about seal hunting, of course, in the past, ecological perspectives, and I asked him who was the biggest shaman, the most powerful shaman at the time. Convinced that he would say his father Orpingalik, Alakanoa Orpingalik. And he said, I expected, he said, no, Avagaiji. He said, how come? Avagaiji was his adopted father. And then he asked me, do you want me to tell you why Avagaiji was bigger, a stronger shaman? I said, okay, yes, tell me. And he made the sign of the cross first, you see. Catholic. He was going to say a story belonging to the devil, to Satan, who had caribou feet, Satan, up north, according to Protestant tradition. And he said, yes, I was a child one winter in the igloo. Orpingalik and Avagaiji were sitting together, and Avagaiji asked Orpingalik, do you believe that I can enter through this timag, my whole body can pass through this timag and go deep down in the ocean, to the bottom of the ocean, and see Sedna, the goddess, and come back? And Alakanoa replied, no, I don't believe it. And Avagaiji put first his forefront on top of the timag, then pushed his head inside to the point that the timag started cracking you see, from the pressure. And then he jumped, he lifted his feet up and disappeared in the ocean, and Alakanwar and an elderly young one could hear him splashing the water, you see, deep down. And he came back the same way. And he said, you see, and Alakanwar believed what he had seen. So, so after that, of course, he opened up and started telling all sorts of shamanistic stories, which I recorded. Both, some in writing, the easiest ones, the others more complicated, as with the songs on tape, and now they're being analyzed by Austin. And
does Austin speak the language?
I don't know, I cannot tell you. I cannot tell you. And last year he asked me, and I gave him written permission, but I don't know. So that is how it was. Life was very difficult, very constraining. Did
you become ill?
Yes, I became ill once from diarrhea or something like that. So every half hour or so I had to go out to eliminate, which is difficult. Because when you eliminate, as soon as you try to pull your pants down, it's cold by the way, it's 50, 60 degrees, it's wind strong. As soon as you or try to attempt to pull your pants down, immediately from behind you are surrounded by half a dozen dogs who wait in order to eat your fishes, you see. And so it is with your left hand that you pull your pants down, and with in the right hand you hold the dog whip and you beat the dogs back, you know. So it is not a comfortable position. And I became very weak. You see, in the cold with no food, and I felt that I was weakening by the minute. And then a man came, the son of the latest shaman, and he told me, do you know who passed this sickness to you, who gave you? That means through magical means. No. He said, that man. I believed him. Absolutely, I believed him. So, as a matter of fact, after that, my health improved. So, plenty of adventures of this sort in the north. Survival is difficult.
Were the greatest challenges physical or psychological?
Psychological. I was young and physically I was very resistant to psychological because you're extremely isolated. I used to travel into camps, and I felt that I can adapt, I can survive here in this constraining environment only if I lose interest in what is going on south, and I take a strong interest in what is going on in front of me. If somebody had told me at the time, that was the Cold War, that an atom bomb had fallen, nuclear bomb had fallen upon Montreal, I would have remained indifferent. So I think now. But when, I don't know, an elderly brought a seal, and they saw him coming from, you see, with the seal, pulling the seal, that was a major event, you know. That was a major event. So that is the condition for psychological survival.
What was the longest that you spent as a PhD student in the field, in one stint?
Well, the winter of Pelly Bay, that was 5-6 months, something like that.
Did you have contact? Did your wife send you letters or something?
Yes, yes.
They arrived?
They arrived, not every day, but I had contact, and essentially I believed that if there is real danger, radio message could go and the plane would come.
Did you have daily contact with the missionary as perhaps the sole other outsider? Did you go to his igloo to have tea in the evenings, or?
Yes and no. Not every day, you know. I was traveling. I was not stationed all the time near the mission. When I was stationed near, I was staying near the mission, I would visit him regularly. But I was slightly embarrassed because I did not attend Mass regularly. I went to Mass from time to time. See, the Eskimos, they did not stay near the mission. They traveled, nomad, migrated left and right, and I followed them, running after them.
Did you collect artifacts and material objects for the museum in Ottawa?
Yes, a few. Not much. Because there is not much to collect, not even ivory carvings.
But in the process of these field trips during your graduate research, did you begin to develop a passion for the place and think, yes, this is a place I could continue working in? Or were you still hankering after deserts and Sahara?
I did not return to Pelly Bay. Instead, I went to Macedonia. After Pelly Bay, after I had written my dissertation, I went to an Indian community in the Yukon Territory called Old Crow. There, that atmosphere was very different. Very different. I was happy. At Pelly Bay, I was oppressed by the cold. Constraints from all sides. At Old Crow, it was probably the happiest time in my life. It was forested area. I had a log cabin. I could buy wood and have somebody to cut it, and I could cook. Every morning, old Paul, who was a shaman, he owned the log cabin that I rented from him. He had a net in the river. Every morning he used to come and greet me with a pink salmon like that, a big one. You see. So I had also plenty of caribou gifts and food and can make fire, happiness, real happiness. And
were Ottawa somewhat disappointed that their Eskimologist turned out to be a salmon lover?
By that time, I could go and study other native communities in northern Canada. I was not obliged to stay all the time with Eskimos.
You still held a position in Ottawa?
I still held a position, but I was on my way out.
So I take it the PhD concluded itself, and you received your doctorate?
I will tell you now, the PhD concluded itself. I wrote my dissertation on processes of ecological adaptation. It was immediately published by the National Museum of Canada. Then I went to Old Crow, the Kuching Indian community. I wrote another monograph which was immediately published, and then went to Macedonia, and after Macedonia back to Pelly Bay for a number of years to do the filming work.
Did your wife and child or children accompany you on any of these field trips?
No. Never. My wife was not interested in the company. She was not an anthropologist. She was born and raised in Ethiopia. Her father was a farmer, Swiss. And after that they were transferred to Kenya because the farm in Ethiopia was nationalized. Despite the fact that she was well acquainted with the realities of the third world, she did not come with me. She did not she was not interested in anthropology, let's say. Let's put it that way.
Was it difficult to jump cultures, languages, climates like this as an anthropologist?
No.
Did you have an ongoing direction, as it were, that held you steady through all these changes? Cultural ecology still?
No. The situation got complicated in 1963. That means my 2 monographs were just published, Eskimos and Indians. I had a PhD. I had moved out of the museum and to the University of Montreal. And I was told that tape is finishing.
5 minutes.
I started understanding that I needed to add theory to my anthropological researches. That my passion for ethnography would not lead me anywhere. So I decided that I had to move out of the museum and go to university. And that was the greatest mistake I made in my life. That ruined my career and my professional life. I should have stayed in the museum as an ethnographer.
Why did you do it, and why was it a mistake?
I did it partially because I didn't get along with my superior, the chief ethnologist. He was just graduated from Harvard. I was Columbia. I didn't get along with him, and then I was offered a very high salary at the University of Montreal, where the intention was to establish a new department of anthropology.
It didn't exist at that time?
It didn't exist, and I was supposed to establish it.
So in modern parlance, you would have been headhunted?
Yes, exactly.
And the appeal to you was?
I wanted out of the city of Ottawa. I wanted to go to a real city. Ottawa is an artificial city, administrative city, like Canberra,
Right.
a place like that.
Right.
While Montreal is a lively city, it's a real city, Montreal, And after that, I felt deeply that I belonged to French culture. I had the opportunity at the University of Montreal to teach in French. So that is why, with a high salary, with everything, I went to the University of Montreal.
You were hired on the strength of intensive fieldwork, 2 monographs, and a PhD from Columbia?
PhD. And the number of papers produced very quickly, not within years, but within months. So, 1963, I was at the Université de Montréal in Montreal, when I was called again by Professor Doug Oliver from Harvard. He was head of anthropology at Harvard, to do filming among the Eskimos. And that is how I entered this marginal field of visual ethnography.
Would that have happened had you still been in Ottawa at the museum?
Yes. I had the museum buy a Bolex camera, and I had a special wooden box built for it, and I carried it to the Stoneweir fishing place during my first summer trip to Pelly Bay, and I did shot plenty of footage there, which got lost. And today, the National Film Board of Canada is making a film, a new film. In a couple of months they will start shooting. And these ethnographic film expeditions in the north, you see, with the Netzelik Eskimos. And they desperately need this original footage, the first one of mine, but I cannot find it.
Lost?
It got lost.
Recently or immediately?
God knows. No, not immediately.
You had the chance at least to develop it and view it?
Oh yes, I developed it. It was black and white.
16 millimeter?
16 millimeter. But it
with sound?
No. So I probably would have done something. What, I don't know. But the challenge 1963, that Professor Oliver sort of gave me was tremendous, and that really changed my life, this project.